So as I see people piling in here, let's begin at the beginning. Obviously, there are different components I want to get into over the course of the hour here. There's the way at least I would frame it is there's the policy element, there is the legal element, there is the political element, and they all interact at different points in the process. So maybe let's start, and maybe Andy, this is a question best aimed at you initially. Could you give us a quick context about how we have gotten it to the moment we're at today, where the two of you had felt compelled to release a comprehensive plan dealing with the way that we raise money for and spend money on schools in New Hampshire?
Sure. So in the 80s and early 90s, the state contributed 6% to the cost of K-12 public schools. Actually, it wasn't K-12 then, it was first grade to 12th grade because we didn't have public kindergarten. 6%, which meant you bore the burden of funding your schools with your local property tax. And if your property wasn't worth enough to support your schools, the state's position was tough, too bad for you. Claremont lost its high school accreditation in the late 80s and went searching for help from the state. None was forthcoming. We wound up organizing a legal team and sued the state. And in important cases in 93 and again in 97, the New Hampshire Supreme Court, very conservative Supreme Court, ruled that providing a public education is a state responsibility. The taxes to pay for that state responsibility are state taxes, and state taxes should be fairly uniform across the state. Those are the three Claremont principles, and the state has not lived up to its responsibility. So there have been other lawsuits, but this is really an attempt to introduce reality, to tell people what it costs, how we raise that money fairly, and to really provoke the policy discussion in time for people to register to run for office in June. That's why we're starting now. So
That's the question I was going to ask in a moment, and I want to get back to that. That's an important element, I think, to the timing of this, I think, is a question I've heard, and I want to get it straight from you. But before we dive into that, um, so what got you, both of you, and this could either of you know, what got you thinking, I need to take sort of a next step? You both have, in your own ways, been doing different forms of education, of advocacy, um, and this is another step. I mean, this is a specific plan with real numbers. We'll get into that in one moment, but what got the nudge? What was the nudge to take it to that next level of a specific plan?
So I think I can answer that, Steve. And to me, this is one of those maybe not so rare moments where good politics and good policy come together. When I was running for office in 2024, I knocked on almost 1,000 doors in my district, and I represent three towns, Canaan, Dorchester, and Orange. None of which are in the higher end of the income scale. We have a lot of folks who are struggling. And every door I went to, two things came up. First was property taxes are just killing people, and it's forcing people to lose their homes. And in some cases, it's homes that have been in their families for generations. And the second thing that would come up is I would talk about, how we need to support public education, which my district has for years and years and years. They support school budgets, even though they recognize it's going to have an impact on their local property taxes because the state isn't doing enough. And it just became clear to me as I sort of looked at this and ended up, meeting with Andy and talking about this. the political framework since Meldrum Thompson, going back to the 1970s, the political framework has been around this thing called the pledge, which is, simple solutions often are stupid solutions and insufficient. The fact of the matter is the framework has always been who's for raising taxes and who's for cutting taxes. The truth of the matter is the real issue is who's paying taxes and who's not. And what's happened, particularly in the last 10 years, is taxes on big corporations and taxes on the wealthiest individuals in our state have been cut. So the wealthy have gotten a tax break. And the way we paid for those tax breaks for the wealthiest businesses and the wealthiest individuals is to push the burden down to local communities and the property tax. So the property tax has been going up and up and up, which is why I say it's not about who's cutting and who's raising. It's about who's paying and who's not paying. And that became clear to me. And as first time I sat down and talked with Andy, 6, 8, 9 months ago, we talked about that. And it seemed to me that there's an opportunity here for good policy to create a tax system that asks those with the most to shoulder the largest burden, to pay their fair share, and those with the least, to try and give them a break, try and give them a tax cut. So that's, to me, both good policy and good politics if we can get out there with the message. And part of that is providing information, which, we can talk about the tax calculator online.
Sure. Before I dive into, I think we'll dive into the plan in a second. Andy, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I don't want to fail to mention him. I wrote a book about school funding. It's called The Last Bake Sale. And I was giving a talk in Enfield, which is in the Upper Valley. And one of the people who came to my talk was Cliff Below. And Cliff and I are old friends. And Cliff is the Below in Hager, Below, Fernald school funding plan, which involved an income tax in the, the turn of the century. It was 1999. And it passed the House and it passed the Senate. And then Governor Gene Shaheen made sure it died.
And that was, as you say, more than a quarter century ago. So I am familiar with the days of Hager, Below, Fernald. I worked for Mark way back in 2002. So I was swimming in this suddenly near the turn of the century. That sounds so long ago. And I guess it is.
I'd like to say it.
It does highlight how long ago it was. So let's do it. Let's talk about the plan for a moment and how much past iterations, such as the one you just described, how much those instruct the way that you put something together in 2026. Do you feel like there are lessons learned, or maybe they weren't learned, I don't know, from past efforts that inform how you look at the way you're doing it at this moment?
So there was a group of about 10 of us that put the plan together with the assistance of the Institute for Tax and Economic Policy. They did the modeling for us. In that group are Cliff Below, Liz Hager, and Mark Fernald.
Okay.
So we were informed by what has gone before. And it led us to make some policy choices, but also to make some public information choices. And Tom's already referenced the website. We put up a website. It's nhtaxsavingscalculator.com. And on that website is a calculator. And you could put in your personal adjusted gross income, either your address or the assessed value of your home, couple of little bits of additional information, and it will tell you what you did in 2024 under the current system and what you would have done if this system were in place. And so first we use 2024 because that's the last fiscal year for which there's a complete data set. So we wanted to use fair data. And we put together a plan that involves a 3% New Hampshire education income tax with significant deductions that I'll tell you about in a second,
Yeah.
married to a $3 statewide property tax, a true one, not the fake one that's in place, with a $250,000 homestead exemption. And that's based on your assessed valuation. So, for example, my home probably has a $650,000 or $700,000 sales price, but its assessed value is $400,000. Of that $400,000, because it's my primary home, $250,000 is exempt. So that $3 statewide property tax would be levied against the remaining $150,000 of value. That protects middle and working class families. The 3% income tax has a $35,000 deductible for taxpayers and $15,000 for each dependent and another $15,000 for a head of household single person. So if you have a 4-person family, 2 adults and 2 kids, you don't pay the income tax on the first $100,000 in income.
And the median income in New Hampshire, as Andy pointed out at the press conference, the median income, so half the people in New Hampshire earn $99,000 or less over each year. So for half the people, if they're a 4-person family, typical 4-person family, they're not going to pay anything on the income tax. The thing that you were very kind in sort of describing my background. I've spent most of my career, I guess the nice way to say it is I was a political consultant helping candidates with media and message. The less polite way is to say I was a hack. But
Your
which
favorite hack.
well, I enjoy. I own the title proudly. But the thing over time, I trust the voters of New Hampshire and the voters in the U.S. And if you give them sufficient information, give them the information, invariably they'll make the right decision. May not have been the decision I wanted them to make, but they make the right decision. And that was what this was all about. It struck me that this was an opportunity, with the calculator idea, to provide people with information. And let me say, by the way, anybody who goes on that website and puts in their personal information, we're not saving that.
Right.
It disappears when they finish, when they get out of the website. That information is gone. So we're not preserving any of that information. So people can have the peace of mind to know it'll give them the information about what the difference would be between what they're currently paying in property, or what they paid in 2024 in property taxes versus what they would have paid under the 3-3 plan. And 4 out of 5 people in New Hampshire are going to save literally hundreds, if not thousands of dollars based on this. And it's going to shift the burden from people who are struggling to people who have the most. And let me just mention one other thing, because it struck me. The New Hampshire Constitution, Part 1, Article 12, very specifically says that the government was formed to help protect and preserve people's property and their ability to live a good life. But in return, the people have an obligation to pay their fair share. And that's not what's been happening in the last 10 years. The people who can afford the most are being given all sorts of tax breaks. And the people who can afford the least are being burdened over and over and over and higher with property taxes. So this was an opportunity to provide people with information and get the message out that we need a change and people want a property tax cut. And that's really the primary message here is this plan is designed to cut property taxes, which are, the highest in the country. And people are literally losing their homes.
So there's, as I said at the top, there's at least 3 different ways, as I was thinking about today, to approach it, and they are interlocked at different points in the process. There is the legal argument. There is what I describe, and I mean this as a lover of data in an affectionate way. There's the spreadsheet element, the nuts and bolts of which the calculator is, I would argue, the interface of the spreadsheet, right? It's the user-friendly interface of the spreadsheet portion of this. Like, how does this work? That kind of part. And then the third part, which I do want to spend much of the rest of the time, because I will tell you that it's what came to my mind. It's what my 25 years in New Hampshire politics invariably becomes an element of. And it's what a lot of the feedback, I think, in the lead up to it that I've heard, I do events and this sort of thing that comes up, is the political element of it. Frankly, what I'll describe as, and again, none of this is with negative, is the salesmanship of what I think you'd acknowledge is a it's a change in thought process. It is a challenge to the current dogma, the current political system and the policy system. So there's work to that. So there's the legal side, which is critical and which, Andy, you in particular are at the dead center of. In some ways, it's probably the least important for this discussion today, because Lord knows folks can Google that and read to their heart's content. Go to one of your events and learn even more. Read your book. But we've been seeing lawsuits consistently going in one direction for 3 decades. And yet, I think it's fair to say that the challenges identified in the 90s are more acute today than they were 30 years ago. I mean, the practical impact between certain kinds of towns. Do you agree? Why do you think, and this may be more for you, Andy, because you've been in the middle of it for so long, why, despite the fact the lawsuits have been going consistently in one direction, has the political culture and thus the policy not been following along in the same direction as the lawsuit decisions?
Well, I think it's fair to say there have been a number of lawsuits. I have not been involved in all of them, although a lot of them. We were at 6% state funding when this started in Claremont. We're now at 20 or 22%. So every time there's a lawsuit and the Supreme Court reaffirms the state's responsibility, the legislature responds in part. And I think what's been missing, and I'll defer to you and Tom on this, but the complaints I'm hearing about the local property tax and the burden, the uneven burden that imposes, those complaints are louder now than I've heard in a long time. So loud that the Republican and Democratic leaders are at least mouthing the problem. They're not offering solutions. They're not showing leadership, but they're acknowledging the problem. And so I think of the 3-3 plan as providing hope and reality. The reality is the numbers. We've shown how to do this. The hope is that we can muster enough public support to actually force some change.
I think, Steve, and you and I have enough of a background in politics to know there are those campaigns where the environment simply isn't there, and you can run a great campaign and still not win simply because it was the wrong battleground. You were on the wrong field, to use the military analogy. This is a moment, I think Andy's exactly right. The pressure of increasing property taxes, I think, has never been higher. It is combined with what I think, we all recognize nationally is a lack of affordability, increasing price pressures on families. And as my good friend James Carville said in 1992, and I think it's even truer today, It's the economy, stupid. And I think things are coming together in a way that that you have to recognize people are hurting, and the policy needs to be looking to help those folks who are struggling the most, combined with the politics of doing something. And I will say this, with all due respect to the Democratic leadership, I think we've been afraid for too long to confront the problems. You can talk about public education, you can talk about healthcare, you can talk about housing, you can talk about these issues, but in the end, the question my constituents were asking when I was campaigning was, how are you going to pay for it? And so far, the Democratic response has been, well, we're going to take the pledge. We're not going to support an income or a sales tax. Okay, but how are you going to pay for it? And we don't seem to be willing, or some of us at least don't seem to be willing to address that. It's past time to be afraid of this issue. And I think politically, we need to address the fact that, the Republicans aren't cutting taxes for middle class and working class families. They're cutting taxes for the wealthiest companies, the Amazons and the Walmarts, and the people at the highest, the 1% of income in our state. They're not paying taxes. But the legislature last year, the Republican legislature last year, and Governor Ayotte signed a bill to impose a health care tax on people making $20,000-$30,000 a year. I mean, but we're going to let millionaires, take tax money to send their kids to religious schools. It's crazy. So I think it's past time for us to be, it seems silly to say be bold. Have the courage to stand up, confront the problem, and actually present some answers.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate for a few minutes here, because I think a lot of just among friends, I think a lot of folks, certainly we know what most Republicans are likely to respond. I took a very quick look between what I presume is the end of your press conference today and when we went on. And so there's certainly predictability in that messaging. But also on the Democratic side. And you've alluded to this a moment ago, Tom. Now, the one question I got asked the other day by somebody is, why, regardless of how one feels about the macro issues or the micro, the solution that you're proposing today, March 3rd, 2026, we are certainly before the filing deadline. I think, Andy, you mentioned that as an element to this. So there's an implication that I'm going to tease out there that may be to encourage candidates to run who would run, at least in part, on this as their platform for running. Is that a fair implication I should take from it?
Let's not imply anything.
Okay.
We're asking people who are paying attention to property taxes to find the time to run for office, and the filing deadline for state offices is in the middle of June. So
Okay.
you have that much time to understand this plan or come up with your own plan. Here's the thing, Steve, just to put it in context.
Sure.
We need leadership for the next 2 decades, not leadership that's married to a 1973 political slogan. I have 3 grandchildren, 3, 5, and 8. How are you going to fund their schools? Going beyond schools, how are you going to pay for higher ed? Are you going to deal with childcare? Are you going to pave the roads? How are you going to do this when you're cutting taxes and downshifting everything to the local property taxpayer? We need leaders for the future, and the timing is in part to give people an opportunity to file for office. And there's a dad joke mixed in here too. This is the 3-3 tax savings plan.
Mm-hmm.
We've announced it on March 3rd.
I see.
Which it's 3-3.
I see. Okay. There you go. There you go.
Let me add something, Steve. I think I introduced a bill this session that asked the Department of Revenue Administration, the folks who, they've got the tax, all the data, all the, they do all of the telling communities how much they need to raise and, what their tax rate should be. These are the tax experts. And we had the decision, in Conval last summer rather, after the 25 legislative session had ended. And so I thought, all right, how about if we ask Department of Revenue Administration to come up with 5 options to raise $500 million, which is basically what the judge in the Conval decision said we needed to get the state contribution to where it needed to be according to the state constitution. And that's, as you said, 33 years of court decisions again and again have reaffirmed the state isn't doing enough. And last summer, for the first time, we actually had hard numbers. $500 million. I thought, this is a no-brainer. This should fly through the legislature, right? I figured the Republicans would oppose it. The Democratic leadership opposed it. And I don't know why you would oppose a bill trying to provide information. And I got the argument about, well, this is the DRA shouldn't be setting policy. And I said, they're not setting policy. They're giving us options. They're providing, it's a research project. They're providing information. And the legislature ultimately will decide what to do with that. The fact that the Democratic leadership opposed it, in spite of that, 76 Democrats voted for my bill. 76. That's almost half the Democratic caucus. And I had people who came up to me afterwards and it's not me. The idea actually for the bill came from this group. Said, well, let's try this approach. Why you would vote against trying to find more information, I simply have no idea. But that to me reflects the lack of, frankly, the lack of courage to address this issue, to confront this issue. And I think we've seen, across the country, people want authentic individuals, whether it's, the new mayor of New York City or the governors of Virginia and New Jersey, people who are actually confronting problems and addressing them, as opposed to hiding behind political rhetoric that is meaningless. And I'll probably get myself in trouble, but the fact of the matter is, one of the things that Andy and I remarked on as we were doing our press conference today, there was a class of students, probably fourth grade. So fourth grade students, okay, and they're going into the State House to do a tour. And I made a comment at the press conference. They were doing this as we were holding our press conference, and I made a comment. I said, "That's the future of New Hampshire." But their parents, and in some cases their grandparents, have gone through their education with the Claremont decision, telling us again and again and again, the state isn't doing enough. And we have a whole generation of students who went through school knowing that, we were not doing the right thing. And I challenged the group. I said, let's not make this generation, grow into adulthood and finish their education in the same system, the same inadequate system.
So, but where I want to go with this is, and I have lived some of this personally. I mentioned way back in '02 was the first year I worked full time in politics as an operative. I worked in the gubernatorial race where Mark Furl won that nomination. The two candidates who ended up filing that year for governor on the Democratic side both espoused different forms of an income tax. There were some, in hindsight, relatively nuanced differences. But when you're in the middle of it, every nuance seems like a chasm. So we were in the middle of that debate in '02. So those were the two candidates that ended up filing. Since then, I mean, Andy, you ran in 20. I ran in 16 and 18. I did not take the pledge, and that seemed to get very little attention at the time. I have a more wonky, background. So I hear you on on the need to do something. Okay. But politically, I want to focus on politically, because the spreadsheet can be gospel. The legal arguments can be tight and effective and clearly victorious. But ultimately, and as you note, Andy, I don't want to slide by it, and makes some incremental progress over time in not to where it should be, but incremental progress over 30 years ago, certainly more than triple. But the political, I haven't seen a poll recently, but it seems like support, statewide polling for some form of income tax. Obviously, details matter. I'm not, is depending what poll, usually the first number is a 3. That's what I see, 35%, something like that over time. It seems like certainly the Democratic candidate for governor, now that it seems like that field, at least for now, seems to be sorting out. The candidate probably leading, if we did the polling today, just went on TV this weekend and said she would not support an income or sales tax. I get the sense that, and I think, Tom, you alluded to this, the Democrats in the state Senate and the state House, certainly in terms of a majoritarian view within the caucus, seem opposed, I'm going to guess, to a plan like this. So there's a lot of political work that needs to be done to get from the spreadsheet and legal strengths of an argument to the political that ultimately is what is needed to get to where you want to go. Help me understand the political strategy that will clearly involve friction within the party in the near term. I think you're braced for that. Clearly. How do you get through that when when the election is in 9 months or so? How do you get to the other side of it politically when it feels like for the last 25 years we've not really seen the political side work over a long period of time?
So I would say a couple things. First of all, neither of us is naive enough to believe we're going to change this overnight. The fact of the matter is, for 20 plus years, I think our leadership has either on the Republican side ignored the issue or tried to change the rules, which voters hate. If whenever you don't like the outcome of something and you want to change the rules of the game, whether it's football or hockey or politics, voters hate it when they see you trying to change the rules just because you're not winning. And that's what I think the Republican approach has been. On the Democratic side, unfortunately, I think people have just sort of abandoned the discussion and have hoped for, I think a lot of campaigns end up being, well, we're not those guys. And I don't think that's sufficient enough. I will also say this, and it's not a perfect analogy in any way, but I remember in the 1990s, when Bill Clinton passed "Don't Ask, Don't Tell" about gays in the military not divulging that they were gay. I can't tell you how many, when I worked at Navy, how many sailors and Marines who came up to us and had very distinguished service, but were gay. The public attitude changed over time. In the 90s, there was this politically, well, you can't talk about, gay marriage and don't ask, don't tell and all this. And then we had, civil unions in Vermont with Governor Dean. And then, it ultimately moved to now, if you come out against gay marriage, people look at you like, what? I think part of that is a recognition that you've got to be honest and authentic about an issue. You've got to talk about it. You've got to, again, it's not going to happen overnight, probably, but the conversation has to start. And from my perspective, the problem has been we have not been willing enough. Too many of us have not been willing enough to confront the fact that we have a revenue problem in this state. It's just clear. The state of New Hampshire is dead last among the 50 states in support for public education. And it's not because the people of New Hampshire don't support public education, because they have demonstrated with their wallets their willingness to support public education. But now it's coming down to, I'm going to lose my home. Now is the moment for us to confront this problem, to talk honestly about it, and to give people information that shows them, hey, you can save money, and there are guardrails we can set up to make sure that we're not just raising everybody's taxes across the board. This is about the state and those people who can pay the most contributing their fair share and reducing the burden on everybody else.
It seems like at a national and state level, the Democratic message is centered around affordability, right? Going into the midterm. Even it's interesting. I was talking with a pollster recently about some federal races in and out of New Hampshire, that the juxtaposition against Trump may actually not be the optimal argument, right? A lot of times you just run against the party, the president in power in a midterm, and that's it. Meanwhile, the Republicans trying to localize all the races, while the Democrats in this case would be the ones trying to nationalize all the races. But the feedback I got back from this pollster, who is somebody who's got a long track record, I respect their look, is that actually may not be the strongest argument in 2026. It may be effective, but it may not be the strongest, and that it really centers more squarely around affordability of the haves versus the have-nots as compared to the left versus the right. Because left versus right's getting kind of messy these days. It's not right doesn't mean what it used to 25 years ago, and the left doesn't quite either. The coalitions are shifting. So a question I have for you, we're about 9 months from election day or so, is it does seem like all the language I see from state, gubernatorial, state senate, state house, and federal, is this affordability. We are looking for ways to keep more money in your pocket and lower costs, and they don't do that. If not, this could go a few ways, right? One way this could go, I could see how you could say, well, actually, this nestles quite neatly into an affordability discussion, right? Taxes. I could also see how it goes kind of a different way and becomes about, holy crap, income tax. And I've lived through those campaigns before, where that it becomes the shiny object for an extended period, and it becomes the only thing people talk about in that context, rather than, say, an affordability context. That's the political exercise, to try to steer it one way versus steer it the other way. How do you, over the next 8 months, how do you steer it so that it goes nestles into an affordability argument, rather than sort of shooting off, as I've seen it before, into this holy crap income tax argument?
So,
Go ahead.
so first, let me call to your attention a poll that was done by Stay Work Play a couple of months ago. That's the 40 and under crowd. They don't have a problem with an income tax. Their polling is not your 35%.
Okay.
They're accepting of economics, really, is what this is. If you have an important foundational service like public schools, and you make it be funded by a small base, that small base gets killed. So if you broaden the base, you spread the cost. That's just basic economics. We have to make that argument. We have to point out, the Democrats don't have the governor's seat, don't have the House, don't have the Senate, don't have the Executive Council, based on a strategy that we're not going to make any changes. And I'm telling you, if you look at all of the special elections, the early primaries, people are showing an appetite for candidates who say they're going to do something about whatever the problem is. And I think affordability is a problem. Our plan, the 3-3 tax savings plan, gives renters a $750 credit against their income tax. Where does that come from? That's the amount of the homestead exemption for a property owner. We are, for the first time, talking about the fact that renters pay property taxes. They pay it through their landlords and their rent. It's a component. So if we knock $750 a year off of your rent, that's affordability. If we knock $2,000 off of your property taxes, your school taxes, that makes your home more affordable. Maybe it keeps your home in your possession for that much longer. That's the argument, and we have to make it. We have to go on things like Steve Marchand's Substack
You're going to need to
and
do more than
make it
that.
broadly.
Shameless plug.
But
There
you
you go.
also have
That's,
to go to taxsavingscalculator.com.
And I'll say this too. New Hampshire has, in by any measure, the second oldest population of any state in the country. Many of those people who are 65 and over, and I count myself in that crowd, many of those people are on fixed incomes. They're dependent on Social Security or some sort of retirement payment if they're fortunate enough to have earned a retirement or had some savings that they could stash away. But for most folks, they don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars in investments. They're probably getting their Social Security check. Those folks are the ones who are also going to see this affordability issue, and those folks are the ones who are going to look at their property tax bill. I made a comment, an analogy. For those folks who have, fairly sizable investment portfolios, there's always this talk about, well, if my investment portfolio, if I'm fortunate enough where my investment portfolio increases in value by, say, 10% in a year, the person who owns that investment portfolio says, look, that's an unrealized gain. I don't really get that money until I sell. And then I actually, earn that 10%. Until then, you can't tax me on the unearned portion of the gain. And yet, for most people in New Hampshire, most people in the country, their home is their biggest investment. But if the home gains 10% in a year, we do tax it. We say, oh, okay, your assessment is now 10% more because your home is increased in value. And so your property tax bill goes up, even though you don't realize that till you sell the house. And that's what's happening to too many people. They're having to sell because they simply can't afford the property tax anymore. We need to have that conversation with the people of New Hampshire. And I think, if people go on New Hampshire tax savings calculator.com and enter their information and look at it, they will realize 4 out of 5 people in New Hampshire will save money under this plan. And we need to have that conversation with people. We need to be honest with people about what we're going to do. We can't just say we support public schools and not have a plan to help fund them in a way that is responsible and fair and meets our constitutional obligation.
Let me add one other thing. At this morning's press conference, we had Bobby Williams. Bobby is a city councilor in Keene. He's also a small business owner. And Bobby pointed out that he didn't have such a good year last year. His property taxes kept going up. But if he had been taxed based on income, as we propose, his tax bill would have automatically gone down. And so the other aspect of this is we have a plan that respects your income. Whether your business is a little slow, or you lose a job, or you get sick, or you get divorced, or you're on a fixed income and your income doesn't rise every year. This plan respects that. What the leadership is doing now doesn't.
There's a few, we've gotten some different comments and questions in the chat and a few others from just questions I've heard over time on this general topic. One of them. Okay, and it appears the GOP has already come up with their own let's just say, form of a calculator, which is, again, I'm not surprised. And it does get at a question I do hear, and often the state of Connecticut, you guys know this cold, was I believe, the last state to introduce an income tax that did not have one. Is that in the early 90s? I don't know if I have that factually correct. I know they did in the early 90s. I believe it's the last state. Um, the the argument was, we'll put in an income tax. One of the primary benefits of it will be it will reduce property taxes, which were among the highest in the country. And here's the counter that I've heard for years. Okay, and then several years later, Connecticut ended up bouncing back to having some of the highest property taxes in the country, as well as an income tax now. And I think what this calculator I'm looking at now, what it suggests is the savings accrue for 80% of taxpayers, assuming that there's a dollar for dollar reduction in property tax for the additional revenue generated from an income tax. If I don't have that accurate, please correct me. Is that, I mean, how do you address that? Because, it probably won't be dollar for dollar.
Well, here's how I would answer it, Steve. And look, what we propose today is a plan. It's not a bill. It's not a law. It's a plan, and it can be tweaked. One of the things that certainly is possible is, as a state representative, I'm not in it for the money. I get $100 a year. That's the salary. That salary was set in the Constitution back in the 1800s. So my argument is, fine, let's pass the 3-3 plan and adopt a constitutional amendment that says the income tax can never go above 3%. And
Now, I remember back in the day, constitutional amendment, as in the past, which is a very hard thing to do. I readily acknowledge it's designed to be a high bar, but has been at times mentioned as a partner in the legislative element of it, in order to say,
right.
hey, the money raised must go towards education. It's structured in a way that would create, in effect, a dollar for dollar reduction or something darn close, that would put the rate in it. It's something that would be more lockstep. Is that sort of where you're thinking?
I'm thinking two things. One, the constitutional amendment, and the state has passed constitutional amendments before,
Yeah.
Even recently. It is a high bar, but it's designed that way. But you could pass a constitutional amendment to create guardrails so that one of the arguments people say is, oh yeah, you're going to impose a 3% tax, and next year it's going to be 4%, and 10 years after that it's going to be 5%. And you're just going to keep raising it. So a constitutional amendment could put a guardrail around it. The other thing you can do, and frankly, I supported a bill this year that said we now have this thing called video lottery terminals. And some of the money, but not all of the money, some of the money goes to the Education Trust Fund. I was co-sponsor of a bill that said they're called video lottery terminals. In 1963, when New Hampshire became the first state in the country to have a state lottery, we promised the people the money would go to the Education Trust Fund. And then a few years later, actually a couple decades later, we actually passed a law that said, the money has to go to the education. Any lottery money has to go to the Education Trust Fund. Well, we said, well, video lottery terminals, that money should go to the Education Trust Fund. The majority said, nah, we're using it for the general fund. That's the kind of information voters need to understand. If you make a promise and you break the promise, as I believe we have done with video lottery terminals, we have the ability of voters to hold us accountable if they have the information. And that's why I guarantee you, I shouldn't say that. I suspect that if the other side has come out with a calculator,
Yeah.
that calculator is as accurate as, the craps table at in Vegas.
I have not played with it yet. It's got somebody in the chat who put the URL, which I typed in a moment ago just to see if it, look at it. But I've not I've not played with it in any way yet, but it is live and unsurprising because that's how this stuff goes. What about somebody asked about voucher? Look, there's been a slew of degradation to the already, low levels of state funding, including vouchers, which we've now effectively eliminated the cap, and it's just the money's going out the door even faster than it's coming in. Put those elements into the context of what you have proposed today. I presume this is a piece of something a little more holistic in the long term.
Well, I'd say this: if you don't get the funding right on a foundational service like education, public education, it's easier for the free staters to take their pot shots, because it's easy to complain that my property taxes are threatening my home, and then I'll listen to any crappy idea Jason Osborne, the majority leader, comes up with, including wanting to make every public school a private school. We have public schools for a reason, and they support our democracy. And so if we don't fund them right, every 6 months, or in a city every 4 months, every 3 months, people complain, and they're right to complain. And so we have to get that right first. And I would say, I know your question before last was you were relaying what others have said. I would say it is the highest irony for people to worry that our legislature will spend money like it's going out of style when they won't even pay for the services they've been told to pay for by the court system.
Again and again and again. And there's a story in the Concord Monitor today, an investigation that they did looking at the fact that there are a number of small rural schools who are having great success on reading scores, on testing reading scores. And what they found was they have a couple things in common. One of which is they get consistently good support for their school budgets. They are willing, their residents are willing to pay out of their pockets the property taxes that it takes to support good public schools. The other thing, and shocker, is many of these small rural schools have small class sizes. So teachers, and I started my career teaching 6th grade English, teachers have the opportunity to work more often one-on-one with students and help them achieve success. So, budgets and smaller class sizes really have a great deal to do with success, no matter what you hear.
Well, so let me transition here as we approach 1 o'clock. Today is a kickoff in a public way. What's next? Because I go back to this political element, not so much the legal, not the spreadsheet argument, although you created the interface for it, but this political. There's a lot of salesmanship. There's a lot of convincing communication to do. Where do you go from here? Particularly, I presume you've got this deadline of June as one obvious timestamp, and then November, I suppose September, and then November as important timestamps. How do you try to get to those? What do you do between now and each of those timestamps?
Well, we try to involve as many voters as we can, one to one. We ask them to go to their boards of select people or alder people or school districts and ask them to invite us in to explain the plan. None of this, false explanation by people who don't have an honest role in the matter, like the Republican plan that was just put up, the Republican calculator. Ask your governing boards to pass resolutions supporting the plan. If people are running for office, you need to ask them, how are you going to fund our schools? And why are you doing it that way instead of another way? And really kick the tires.
And I think we've got a couple dozen people who have been part of this group, and it's a growing group. I don't know how many of the 76 who voted for my bill to have DRA, come up with some revenue solutions. Many of them, I think, are supportive of this plan, of having this conversation. They'll be, helping to carry this message. I think we'll be working with anybody who wants to run for office. I know there are many of us who are willing to work with them and provide them with information, provide them with talking points. But we got to begin to have this conversation. And, maybe it happens in the 27th session, maybe it doesn't. But we've got to keep the momentum going. And so, we're willing to do our part.
Do you look at, obviously, winning elections is a necessary part of getting to decide policy, right? I think, separate from this particular issue for a moment, on so many issues, and I've done some work on my Substack writing about it to try to quantify this. It's a little bit of Groundhog Day a lot of times. Republicans have, depending on the attendance in a given day, and Tom, you're there now, 30 to 40 seat advantage. And they'll do a bill. And it'll go the same way with about 2 or 3 defections on each side of the aisle tops, sometimes none. It's almost more parliamentary a lot of days, it feels like, than it is a old school House. 181 to 155 or 177 to, I mean, it's the same. It's highly predictable with a handful of exceptions. So Dems have to win more elections in order to be able to make policy happen. You're pitching the policy that needs to happen, or at least a version of it, right? You've put, hey, like, here's something on the table, guys. If you don't like it, try something else. But spiritually, here's where we got to go, and we've put specific things on the table to get this ball going. Does this help win to win enough elections? I'm trying to connect that dot, taking an idea and getting more wins quickly, because every 2 years the damage gets worse with the current cohort in office right now. How do we? Because it's come up, I've gotten text about, I'm getting it left and right. This kind of broad question: how do we connect the big idea and the courage to put something on the table with the idea that we got to win more elections so that we can make, in theory, good ideas become law instead of losing almost all the time because we're in the minority? How do we connect those dots over the next 8 months most effectively?
Go ahead. So I think you do it by connecting 2 issues that are absolutely true in this state. The number one issue for people for most people in the state of New Hampshire is their property tax bill. They can't afford it, and it's getting worse and worse and worse, and they simply can't afford it. We've got to do something about property taxes. And the second issue is they support public schools. They've demonstrated it again and again and again. We actually do pretty well on a per pupil basis when you compare with the rest of the country. But the fact of the matter is it's coming directly out of people's pockets based on the value of their home and their property tax bill. So those 2 issues, if you can connect the dots and say, hey, look, we know you support public schools. We know you want to continue to support public schools. We know you don't support the idea of sending tax dollars to millionaires so they can pay for their kids' religious tuition school. So we have a plan to reduce your property taxes and support public education. Marry those 2 issues together, and I think you have a winning conversation. The last thing I'll say is, you and I both know this because we've done this before. Every campaign I've ever been in, there's somebody who always says, you can't be a one-issue candidate. Well, that's not true. Ask Hugh Gallen in 1978 when he upset Meldrum Thompson on one issue. It was the construction work in progress charge that Public Service Company of New Hampshire wanted to charge to build the Seabrook nuclear plant before it produced 1 electron of energy. I did a gubernatorial campaign in New Jersey on the issue of property taxes and car insurance. Those 2 issues. And it was an affordability issue. And we nearly defeated. We came within 1 point of defeating one of the most popular incumbent governors, Christy Todd Whitman, in New Jersey in 1997. I've seen it again and again and again. If you get an issue that people care about, 1992 and Bill Clinton and the economy stupid, again and again and again. I think if Democrats run with a campaign about reducing property taxes while still supporting public schools, that's a winning campaign.
So what do you do in that example, though? This is where I'm kind of going. Gallon was the nominee, right? In 78. It does not appear, and I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth. I'm going off of what I can see in public information. It appears, at least at this juncture, that much of the top to bottom state level ticket would be somewhere between reluctant and opposed to what you are proposing today. I don't want to overstep, but so what do you do with that?
So I was thinking you were going to say a movie title that was something and we'll let people figure that out. I'm going to tell you the thing that pisses me off the most.
Okay.
The thing that pisses me off the most in politics is the candidate who refuses to offer any solutions because they take the pledge. And, I live in Concord. There is no reason on God's green earth for someone running for office in the Concord area to take the pledge. Doesn't matter here. Same is true in Keene or the Upper Valley or where you live in Portsmouth.
Most of the seacoast now, yeah.
And Dover and Rochester now even. The people who reflexively, thoughtlessly say, I'm not going to offer a solution, I'm taking the pledge. Those are the people we need to call out. That's where we start. Because people in those communities and some others expect those who aspire to political leadership to offer real solutions. This is a real solution. And I think if people go to nhtaxsavingscalculator.com, they'll find out more information about the plan and how it works in their particular circumstance so that they can make an informed choice. You don't like this plan? Show me another. But don't tell me there's nothing we can do about the affordability crisis while you're running for office.
Yeah, I'd just add anybody who takes the pledge. The pledge is not a political solution. It's not even a political answer. It is thoughtless. I don't want to think, so I'm going to take the pledge. And, we've been living with that for 50 years. The New Hampshire advantage isn't. The New Hampshire advantage isn't for working class people. It's not for middle class people. It's not for seniors on fixed incomes. It's only for the top 1% and the wealthiest corporations. Those who have gotten those are the ones who got tax breaks, tax cuts over the last 10 years, thanks to the Republican majority. It's time to give property taxpayers a break.
That seems as good a place to end as any, both with definitive final comments. Andy Volinsky, Tom Oppel, I know it's a very busy day for you, and I appreciate you taking time today to get into the weeds a little bit, take a little bit of skeptical feedback I got and respond to it. This is the place to do that kind of thing, and I appreciate all your work. And again, for you taking the time today. I appreciate all you for watching live, or we'll record this. This will be a podcast if you've listened that way. Thank you very much for listening. You can go to stevemarshan.com for my Substack. We'll be writing a lot about this and the broader topic of education funding, the way we raise and spend money, the way we structure education. It's a dead center kind of issue in New Hampshire, and it appears it will be again in 2026. Thanks again to my guests, Andy and Tom. Thank you for listening. We will see you all soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.